Okay, week 14, I want to start with Buffalo losing in Los Angeles. So the Rams put up all sorts of offense, 457 yards of it. They start 10 of 11 on third downs. They finish 11 of 15 on third downs with a fourth down conversion in there. Stafford has a 96.7 QBR out of 100 for the game. Historically, it's one of the best games he's ever had. And I think it's also important to point this out, though, with the Bills losing at LA. The Rams are kind of good. 1-4 start, 6-2 in their last 8, and they've figured it out because at the beginning of the year, whether it was the receiver injury, not knowing the defensive setup, and then the O-line shuffle and Stafford getting smashed all over the place. Like, this is a remarkable job by Sean McVay and figuring this thing out, and just another year where it's like, appreciate Stafford. All right. So we could, because Buffalo's a Super Bowl contender, obviously, we could sit here on a Monday and ask some questions about the Bills defense. They are 17th in opposing yards per play allowed. So I think that's just a really important stat, kind of cuts through it. Like, each play, what does the other team do? That's the lowest of any of the Super Bowl contenders. Is actually slightly behind Baltimore, but it's 5.4 versus 5.5 for Buffalo. So some of the margins become really thin here. Maybe you don't think Baltimore is a Super Bowl contender with that pass defense that we've talked about and all the penalties and the issues with Tucker as a kicker. I still think they are. So there you go. Look, Detroit's 14th in opposing yards per play allowed. So if you look at the Bills defense, you could say, okay, what's good out of this group? Well, they're 9th against the pass, which I think is important because when you play the Bills, you have to keep up with Josh Allen, so you have to throw the football. So I think this is one of the rare times where some of the non-adjusted stats are pretty telling, because you can just look at the old school, hey, how many passing yards do you give up? And knowing that all these other teams are trying to keep up with you, the fact that the Bills are top 10 still is a good sign. If you look at some of the other traditional stuff with this, you want to know who's the number one team defensively against just passing yards? It's Tennessee. Why? Because you don't have to pass against them. They have the third worst point differential in the NFL. And even though they give a bunch of points in yards to Stafford hit 10 pass plays for 15 or more yards, I just don't care, because the Bills are 8th in scoring. And they're there with all the other big boy teams. Like, all the real football teams are basically within that top 10 in opponent scoring. So I don't care about a loss. That would be the tier. Or maybe the tier would be, let's not do this on a Monday TV show tier. Because if anything, I think it's me being more impressed with Josh Allen getting Buffalo back into this game, because after the block punt at 17-7, nothing seems to be going Buffalo's way. They get down 31-14 in the second half, and he brings them back, even though the Rams did a really good job of kind of closing things out, controlling things at the end, and you hope Buffalo could get a stop. They couldn't get it. There's really not much about this loss that concerns me. And I would put Buffalo in that tier of, let's not do this on a Monday TV show after a loss segment. With Buffalo, as we just mentioned, Detroit, Philadelphia. Is Minnesota in it? I think it's a fair question, because Minnesota is a funny storyline team if you think of the development of how their 24 has gone. They get off to this incredible start, the Darnold reclamation project, but they're actually doing it a lot with defense. And then you see what they did yesterday with their weapons at wide receiver and how clean Darnold has been. They win all those games that started. They lose back-to-back in October, a 2-point loss to Detroit, another loss to L.A., who, again, we've now defined as a good football team, and they've won 6 straight since those 2 losses. So Minnesota feels somewhat off the radar, or under the radar, or whatever you want to say. Darnold has been interception-free for a month. But with Minnesota, and it's a bit of the college football thing that some people didn't understand when I try to explain it, is that I think we all have like carryover equity with all of these teams. Like, why do you think certain teams will be good in August in any sport? Well, in basketball, you still have some time to pick it up. Baseball is in season, but you get the point. Like, why do any of us think anything about any of these teams? Why is there more buy-in for Buffalo or Kansas City or maybe Philadelphia than there would be Minnesota? Because with Minnesota, it's still really new. Well, whatever it is in 24, it's worked out for them. And Darnold has been terrific. Who else should be on that list? Minnesota feels like a yes, but again, we know there'll be resistance. Green Bay, maybe not yet. Jordan Love's been dealing, though. He is now leading the NFL in yards per pass attempt the last month. It leaves Pittsburgh, who we haven't mentioned yet. Maybe. I'm not there yet, though. Where if the Steelers won the Super Bowl, that would be surprising. Like, that's the question you have to ask yourself, and I do that exercise a lot. Like, okay, here are the teams that they won the Super Bowl. Like, okay, that makes sense. If the Pittsburgh Steelers win the Super Bowl and we're sitting there in New Orleans going, how did that happen? Like, I still feel like it would be a surprise, despite the defense, despite Wilson's improvement, and where they are with all these other teams and a couple really nice resume wins. So that leaves Kansas City, that's certainly on the list. 14 straight wins, one score games, not 14 overall, but 14 straight wins in one score games. And they did it again last night. They clinched their ninth straight AFC West, which is the second longest streak in NFL history behind only the Patriots, who won the AFC East 11 straight. The last time the Chiefs didn't win the AFC West was when Peyton Manning won a Super Bowl with Denver in 2015. This was a great game last night. There was just all these different things that were happening. I think Kansas City's tackling in the first half, limiting the Chargers offensively. I love their linebackers. Like, we all love Chris Jones at D-line and how they use him and line him up all over the place. I love Kansas City's linebackers, how hard they tackle, how intense they are, their pursuit. It's just a lot of fun to watch. And so Mahomes, who's getting beat up again, we'll get you some of those numbers. He was hit 13 times last night. He's been knocked down 46 times this season, which is the third highest total of any quarterback in the NFL, behind only Stafford at 52 and Burrow at 50. So I get worried. Their new left tackle, he leaves the game. Juwan Taylor at right tackle, who I feel like the refs have just given up calling false starts on him because he keeps doing it. It's like, he's not going to learn. All right, whatever. The tough love hasn't worked with the penalties. But as much as you worry about Mahomes, there's dudes going down all over the field. The Chargers are missing receivers. The Chiefs are missing defensive backs. And it's this back and forth game where Herbert's responding. And I hope this year, again, I've touched on it a few times. Like, I really hope that we're not trying to reassess who Herbert is or isn't if they don't win a playoff game. They're projected to be in the playoffs right now. They seem like a really good football team. They're not in that list of tier one, like Super Bowl contenders. But Mahomes just steps into his Mariano Rivera role and the game is over. It's just like, okay, what's going to happen here? He's going to make the right decision every time, and then they're going to walk off and kick a game-winning field goal. But there was still a play here that I thought was really important. So the Chargers are out of timeouts. We're at the 2-minute warning. The Chiefs are facing 3rd and 7. I don't like when teams are criticized for passing in some of these moments. I mean, it depends on who your quarterback is, right? But like, there are third downs where, sure, you want to run some clock, but do you want to run clock so bad that you hand it off to your running back to just run it up the middle for 1 yard to run clock, giving yourself no chance of converting the third down and running out even more clock? Teams are far more aggressive now, which I think is a good thing, but there still seems to be like teams that'll prioritize clock over just having a chance of converting third down. Well, when you have Mahomes, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Because on this 3rd and 7 play, he drops back, flushes out to the right, avoids a tackler, and then hits Kelsey for 9 yards, first down. They're going to run clock, and they're going to win this game. Now, apparently, the conversation on the sideline, if you looked at some of the post-game stuff, was that Mahomes basically telling Reed, like, I got it. I can't imagine there's any debate. Like, are you ever going to be a head coach going, no, let's just run a little bit more clock here. I don't trust you in this spot. The other part of this that speaks to the chemistry between Kelsey and Mahomes that we're all aware of is that Kelsey was supposed to run some corner route and then realized the coverage was different than what they thought pre-snap, or they weren't calling a play that was going to match whatever the defense was. So he just stopped his route, sat down, free spot. Mahomes avoids the pressure, flips it to him, first down, and that's going to be it. And they're going to line up for a game-winning field goal, 1 second left, with, by the way, their third-string kicker who hits it off the upright. And, of course, because it's the Chiefs, it goes in. You would think in the NFL, because these are professional quarterbacks, the best in the world to do this, that there should be a longer list of quarterbacks a head coach can trust in that spot. But I don't know that the list is as long as it should be. And Mahomes is certainly at the top of that list. And I can't imagine being a fan of other teams in the AFC West because you don't get to appreciate how special this is because you hate it so much. And I understand why you hate it. But I did have this thought, which kind of brings it back full circle to the Pittsburgh question, is if you're a Steelers fan or whatever, I mean, if you're just thinking about the Steelers and what they're good at, and we know that this is a very diminished version offensively of what the Mahomes Chiefs have been, you're probably having a moment being like, we can't beat those guys. Like, we can't do that. We can't do what the Chargers did and maybe just hang in there one more possession, get a stop on third down when they're backed up and get the ball back. Like, we can't do that. And I don't blame you for doing it. But for anybody else that's not passionately aligned with the Steelers, you picking them? Are you going to pick that Steelers team on the road in Kansas City to pull that game off, knowing that the Chiefs just feel automatic in a league where it's not supposed to be automatic in one-score games? We got a stat for you.
Stats to impress people.
Okay, thanks, Wargon. All right, so I don't know how many of you were locked into Bears-Niners. I watch it because of Caleb Williams, and this is about as bad as I can ever remember seeing it. So the Niners led 24-0 at halftime. Total yardage, are you ready for this? 319 for San Francisco. Four total yards for Chicago. If you told the high school team, hey, you're playing an NFL team this week, the only thing you have to do is get more than 4 yards in the first half. I know that sounds really insulting. Could you tell a high school team all you have to do is not be outgained by 315 yards in the first half? That's probably less likely, but yeah, I think if you had a high school staff, you said, all we need is 5 yards, and we did it. Mission accomplished. It doesn't matter if it's 50-0 in the first half. We just need 5 yards. That's about as bad as it gets for a first half in this league. I want to talk Carolina. They got a screen. I was locked into Carolina, Philadelphia, because this Bryce Young resurgence is real, and it's been fun. It's 3 games now, all losses, all close losses, tough ones, where Bryce Young looks like a completely different QB. Sure, there's going to be a few decisions in there that you're not going to love. Facing 3rd and 3 from his own 36, 2 minutes to go in the first half. He throws a terrible pick. They're up 10-7 in that spot. Like, backed up that deep, third down, you can't turn the ball over. You got to make them go the length of the field. He gives them a short field. Philadelphia scores a touchdown. That's a mistake. There was a turnover on downs prior to the last turnover on downs. 4th and 2 throw, didn't really love it. But there's a 3rd and 11 escape from the end zone, which reminds you of why this guy was picked number 1 overall. He actually threw the potential game-winning touchdown to Leggett, who dropped it, was just not able to corral it. Probably should have pulled that one off, as much as I loved him at South Carolina. So there were always, we're not talking about perfect scores here with quarterbacks. So we want to nitpick and be like, oh, I don't love that. I don't love it. Just watching him, he looks different. He actually looks like he's having fun playing football, where he looked shot mentally the first half of this season. And if you think of the storylines of the idea that he was never going to play for the Panthers again, which never made any sense to me at the time, which I said, but then to see him back to this gives you hope. And the reason I bring that up is because if you were to look through, and I think it's important to do this towards the end of a season, project which teams you think could be making a change at quarterback. Let's cast a wide net here and then try to whittle the list down, because I don't think Carolina is on the list anymore based on what we've seen from Bryce, which is not what you would have thought when he was benched. So again, I'm doing this to be like cover all the bases here, knowing as I say it out loud, I don't actually believe that this quarterback or team is part of this list. So Tua, it's only a health thing, but he's been really good. He missed that month and a half. The Rams game wasn't great. Green Bay, he got beat up in that one, but only 1 pick. And, the Tua knock is always the off-schedule stuff. Well, all of that stuff against the Jets in that comeback yesterday, that last drive, a lot of it was off schedule, and he found a way. And the Jets also found a way to make all that stuff happen. So, look, he's not even on the list. On the other side of it, though, with that Rodgers loss and the Jets, I don't know how the Jets just run this back. You tried, you got hurt, came back, you made every change you could possibly want. You got rid of the head coach. You fired the GM who did a good job. You brought in his receiver. Like, how are you running all of this back when, if he were special still or just below special, I'd understand it, but he's not. He's not, and I don't know how you'd run it all back. Cleveland, we know what the deal is. It's all about money. The dead cap hit before June 1st is like $80+ million. They could do it after June 1st and carry it for 2 years. I wouldn't rule out anything in Cleveland, even though we've been obsessing over what the dollar amount would mean for moving on from Deshaun Watson after a fully guaranteed contract. But that might not be a definitive yes. Yes is actually how it's pronounced. Jacksonville's a no. Tennessee is a yes. Will Levis had a throw. Man, 2 routes to the left. The back of the end zone's covered. The front of the end zone is wide open. The original read was the right side, so you can understand him shifting over and going through the progressions and not seeing the underneath guy. The problem is that it's the same stuff we saw in college. It's the same thing you've seen from Will Levis. He just doesn't see it, and I think it's time to turn the page. Vegas is a yes. They were on Desmond Ridder yesterday. The Giants are a yes. Drew Lock, Tommy Cutlets here. Atlanta, Kirk is definitely struggling, but his deal was basically a 2-year deal, $100 million guaranteed in those first 2, and the reason why I think even with Penix and the draft pick they spent on him, and as good as he looked in limited time, you probably bring him back financially. And I'll get to why that reason makes the reasoning behind it is really the way I should say it. Minnesota, this isn't even like, I know there were some questions about Darnold and was it wearing off a little? I don't even know why you would mess with it. Just pay the guy. Like, look around. And Darnold has been like really, really clean after a kind of a disastrous game against Jacksonville. The Colts, I don't see it. I don't think they see it. I know some people think it's been better. I think there's a real tell with how teams feel about their quarterbacks, what they let them do in the red zone. And now some of it can be a little misleading because if you look at Jalen Hurts' pass attempts in the red zone, well, the number is just going to be lower because they're so good at running the football and they can just convert at the goal line every single time. So that can be, look, Richardson's somebody they'd like to run a little bit more, but I don't know that they trust him to throw inside the 20 at all. But he's played 13 games, so you probably have to run it back. So the Colts might not be a definitive QB change team here. Pittsburgh, depends on what the options are. Carolina, like I said, I think it's turned into a no. New Orleans with Carr, it's a bit like the Kirk Cousins conversation that we had where his number was restructured, which means that there's just some math on this where it would be a dead cap hit at $50 million in 2025. But remember, the cap right now is $255 million. It's up $47 million since 2022. So say the cap is like $275 million. Some of these dead cap numbers that we think are impossible to manage. Now, the Saints have all sorts of other problems with their cap, but there's going to be bigger pills that can be swallowed here. And I'll never forget like the Antonio Brown thing at the time with the Steelers. Like everybody was like, no, they can't. The cap, it's just too big. It's too much. And they're like, nope, we're done. We've had it. By the way, another little factoid for you. Did you know that Derek Carr is actually younger than Taysom Hill, who is now on the IR? All right, so if we go through and say, okay, give me the definitive yeses, as we've talked about everybody here. It's the Jets, it's Tennessee, it's Vegas, it's the Giants. Let's say there's 2 more, say there's 6. But the problem is, as I finish here, in 24, we all know there were 6 quarterbacks drafted in the top 12. Go and take a look at the mocks. Now it's December, so the mocks will certainly be different in the next few months, but it's pretty consensus as of right now. It's either Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. I've seen Cam going 1. I've seen Shedeur going 1. I've seen generally most of them projected to be like top 6 picks. After that, good luck. Yours is disappointing. Beck, I think, is a disaster. I like Aller both better than both of them. Then you start getting to the Nussmeier group about of all of this. There's not the depth in this draft, at least the way we see it today, for there to be enough quarterbacks for all these teams to be this aggressive to make that kind of change. So say there are 6 teams, where are the quarterbacks coming from? That's why when I talk about Atlanta, it's like they'll probably just keep Cousins and then figure it out unless one of them becomes super desirable in the trade market. It's why Pittsburgh probably just kind of runs it back. Like I saw a mock draft where I've seen mocks where no other quarterback, there's no third quarterback in the first round. I've seen Beck go and be the third quarterback. I've seen Milroe be the third quarterback to Pittsburgh, which makes 0 sense whatsoever. You might as well just keep Fields. And I don't know how anybody is excited about Beck after this season. So say it's 6 yeses. where are the quarterbacks coming from? Because even if there's a lot of teams that want to get aggressive and make change, and maybe the list should be longer, and there's always a couple surprises, I don't think the supply is going to be there this offseason.